This is another podcast from Alpha Business Media. Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Hey, good to be back.
So today, we're digging into something pretty fundamental for, well, any country, really. Economic health, resilience.
Mm-hmm.
How do you build up your own capacity?
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, we're looking at Nepal. The challenge and maybe the opportunity of strengthening its own domestic supply chains.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case.
You've gathered quite a stack of stuff for us, articles, some research, your notes.
Yep, got it all here.
And the mission, as always, is to sift through it, pull out the key insights, and help you, the listener, get a clear picture. What's really stopping Nepal from making more locally? And where are the real glimmers of hope?
It's a really interesting situation because Nepal's got this, well, it's almost a paradoxical economy.
How so?
Well, it's officially a least developed country, right? But so much of its economy hinges on something very global: migration and remittances. The money sent home.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The sources, they paint a picture. GDP per capita, maybe $4,460 nominal for 2025.
Yeah.
But much higher, like $5,720 if you look at purchasing power parity.
Right, what the money actually buys there. And there's growth forecasted maybe 3.3% this year, picking up to 4.5% next. Decent numbers.
But like you said, the huge factor, the thing that really defines it, remittances.
Oh, absolutely. It's the engine. We're talking nearly 27% of GDP in 2023. Some projections even put it over 30% recently.
Wow.
The numbers are huge. NPR, 11,191 billion. That's like 8.7 billion US dollars just in the first 9 months of this fiscal year. And that's up 10% from last year.
That is an enormous amount of money flowing in. And obviously, it's done incredible things for poverty reduction. The sources make that clear.
Absolutely vital, no question.
But then, then you hit the snag, the policy challenge, all that foreign cash coming in.
Yeah.
It can actually hurt building up your own industries, can't it?
It really can. It's that classic phenomenon sometimes called Dutch disease or something similar.
Right.
Basically, huge inflows of foreign currency push up the value of your own currency. So suddenly, imports look really cheap.
And your own stuff.
Your own locally made goods become more expensive for others to buy, harder to export. It kind of stifles domestic production, even though the money itself is good news in other ways.
And the consequence, this massive trade deficit we see in the numbers.
Staggering, isn't it? Over NPR, 1,256 billion, just in the first 10 months of this financial year.
10 months.
Yeah. And imports, they make up over 87% of Nepal's total trade in that time. Just think about that ratio.
It's hard to even picture. For every dollar they sell, they're buying back, what, $8 worth?
Roughly, yeah. It's a huge imbalance.
So what is all this stuff coming in? The lists are long.
Pretty much everything you'd expect. Fuel, petroleum products are big, machinery, equipment. Stuff you need to build things, ironically.
Right.
Electronics, vehicles, tons of consumer goods, medicines, processed foods, textiles, plastics, you name it.
And look, this isn't just numbers on a page. For you listening, this matters because it means the economy is, well, vulnerable.
Exactly. Vulnerable to global price hikes, shipping problems, policy shifts in China or India. And it holds back job creation at home. Why make it if you can just import it cheaper? Because of that currency effect.
So strengthening these domestic supply chains, it's not just economics. It's about resilience, self-sufficiency almost.
Definitely. And keeping more value circulating inside Nepal itself.
Okay, so that frames the challenge. Massive import dependence fueled by remittances. Now, what about the other side? What does made in Nepal actually look like today? What are they producing?
Well, the manufacturing sector itself is modest. That's probably the word. Its contribution to GDP is relatively small, maybe even shrinking a bit percentage-wise. The whole secondary sector, manufacturing included, is around 12.4% of GDP this year. The actual value for manufacturing, about NPR, 131 billion at constant prices.
Which, yeah, compared to that trillion-plus rupee import bill, it feels small. But there are successes, right? Things people would recognize.
Oh, for sure. There are definite bright spots. Food and beverages is one area. Think instant noodles. YY is a huge local brand. Apparently has over half the market share there.
YY, yeah, I know that one.
Right. Also cookies, dairy products, processed grains. Footwear is another interesting one. Gold Star shoes.
Gold Star, okay.
Known for being affordable, tough. And they actually export some too, which is interesting. Then you have textiles, pashmina, wool, though that sector is facing challenges. Personal care, like Unilever Nepal operates there. Ayurvedic products, Dabur Nepal. And traditional handicrafts, of course.
So it proves it can be done. Companies can build brands, compete.
They absolutely can, but often in specific niches or areas with traditional strengths or maybe lower tech sectors. You contrast that list with the import list again.
The cars, the electronics, the heavy machinery.
Yeah, the bulk pharmaceuticals, lots of processed foods, all sorts of textiles and plastics. The scale and complexity of imports just dwarfs the domestic production in many areas.
And you mentioned something earlier. It's not just finished goods coming in.
That's a crucial layer to this. Finished goods like your phone or TV, that's about 43% of imports. But intermediate goods, the parts, the components, the raw materials needed to make other things, that's almost half, nearly 49%.
Wow.
And then capital goods, the actual machines for factories, that's another 9% or so.
So even when something is being made in Nepal,
Chances are a huge chunk of the inputs, the actual physical stuff going into it, is imported. One survey mentioned in the sources suggested over 51% of raw materials for manufacturing come from abroad.
okay. So you might be doing the assembly, the final processing, but the value chain starts somewhere else.
Yeah.
That definitely weakens the made in Nepal impact.
It really does. It means even domestic producers are exposed to those global supply chain risks and costs. Successes like YY are important, absolutely, but they often exist within that broader dependency. It's a fundamental hurdle.
Okay, got it. Heavy import reliance, even for domestic production. Modest manufacturing base overall. But let's flip to the positive side. Why push so hard to change this? What's the real upside of stronger domestic supply chains for Nepal?
The potential benefits are huge. They touch everything, the economy, national resilience, even skills and opportunities for people.
Let's start with the economy, the jobs angle.
That's probably the most direct payoff. More manufacturing means more jobs. Factory work, yes, but also management, logistics, engineering, sales across the skill spectrum.
And that's critical given the migration numbers.
Absolutely critical. We saw that number over 850,000 Nepals leaving for work just last year. Creating decent jobs at home is the main way you counter that outflow.
Yeah, that figure is just staggering to think about.
It really underlines the urgency. But beyond jobs, think about that trade deficit. Reducing imports helps the balance of payments, might strengthen the currency eventually, it grows manufacturers' share of the economy, and crucially, it keeps more money, more value circulating inside Nepal.
Right, the money stays home, generates more activity. What about resilience? You mentioned vulnerability before.
Well, this is maybe even more important now. The last few years, with COVID, geopolitical stuff, we've all seen how fragile global supply chains can be.
Definitely.
Relying heavily on imports leaves you wide open to disruptions, price spikes, export bans. Stronger domestic production is like an insurance policy, a buffer.
And you mentioned, here's where it gets really interesting, connecting this to national security.
Yeah, the sources draw that link explicitly, especially for essential goods. Think food security.
Right.
If there's a crisis, can you guarantee imports of basic necessities? Maybe not. Being able to produce more essential food items, medicines, etc., domestically, that is a national security issue.
That's a powerful way to frame it. What about skills? Does making things locally build up the workforce?
Hugely. Manufacturing is a massive engine for skills development. Technical skills in the factory floor, sure, but also management, quality control, logistics planning, R&D. It spins off demand for related industries, packaging, transport, maybe even developing local raw material sources eventually.
It creates an ecosystem.
Exactly, and it encourages innovation, adapting products for local needs. Plus, having those skilled jobs and opportunities at home, that's your best bet against the brain drain, giving talented young people a reason to stay and build their careers in Nepal.
Could Made in Nepal actually compete internationally, beyond just niche stuff?
Well, there's potential. Diversifying exports is key, especially if they can produce things with more local content, less imported raw material. Their location is interesting, right next to India, close to Bangladesh. Huge markets. They're already exporting hydropower to India, and there's a deal with Bangladesh. If they can build competitive manufacturing, why not export more goods? It's about finding the right products, maybe focusing on quality or unique features, and really building that Made in Nepal brand globally.
And the bottom line for everyday people.
Hopefully improved living standards. More jobs mean more income. Maybe eventually more domestic competition leads to more affordable goods. It's about building a more prosperous economy from the inside out.
Okay, the case is compelling. Jobs, security, skills, exports, living standards.
Yeah.
So why isn't it happening faster? Why is Made in Nepal still relatively limited? What are the big roadblocks?
Yeah, it's not for lack of trying, I think, but the sources point to a whole mess of interconnected problems. It's a really tough operating environment.
Infrastructure's got to be high on the list.
Absolutely foundational. Take energy. Nepal has insane hydropower potential, right? The sources talk about 42,000, 43,000 megawatts economically viable. Huge potential.
Yeah.
But industry. Manufacturers still report high costs and, crucially, unreliability, power cuts. You just can't run modern factories efficiently like that. Tapping that hydro potential for industry at competitive rates is vital, but it's happening slowly.
And getting stuff around. Being landlocked.
Huge cost factor. Roads are often poor quality, especially away from main centers. Only about half the network is paved, according to the sources.
Wow.
That means high transport costs, sometimes over 25% of the product's value, plus transit times. Relying on Indian ports means it takes, 35, 40 days to get goods to Europe? Much longer than coastal competitors. And then there's stored inadequate warehousing, especially cold storage, leading to massive food losses, 20 to 50% for fruits and veggies.
That's just wasted potential right there. Food and raw materials just disappearing.
Exactly. Huge efficiency drain.
Okay, logistics are tough. What about people? The skills needed.
Another major headache, that brain drain we keep mentioning. Skilled workers, educated young people, leaving in droves.
Those numbers again. 856,000 for work, 66,000 for permanent residents last year alone.
That's your talent pool walking out the door. It creates later shortages across the board, even for basic manufacturing jobs sometimes. And it potentially pushes up wages, making it harder for local firms to compete. Remittances might also subtly reduce the pressure for some people to join the domestic workforce.
And the education system itself.
Often flagged as being too theoretical, not quite matching what industries actually need. There are reforms happening, but it's a slow process to bridge that gap.
Okay, infrastructure people.
Yeah.
What about money?
Yeah.
Funding these businesses.
Big challenge, especially for smaller companies, SMEs. There's a huge estimated finance gap, something like $3.6 billion. Getting loans is tough, interest rates can be high, collateral requirements are strict.
Other support programs?
There are, like government guarantee funds, but they often don't reach enough businesses.
Yeah.
Then layer on top bureaucratic hurdles, corruption worries, political instability. It creates uncertainty. Businesses get hesitant about making big, long-term investments. Foreign investors, too. FDI is pretty low, despite policies trying to attract it.
It sounds like a tangled web. One problem feeding into another.
It really is. Policy is another piece. There are good initiatives simplifying business registration, the new startup policy with loans and tax breaks. But sometimes implementation lags. The Made in Nepal campaign itself has struggled for real traction. Business groups raise concerns about regulations, like recent Banking Act changes potentially tightening credit. So, good intentions, positive steps, but scale and consistent follow-through are key.
Land is often an issue in developing economies, too.
Yes, especially around cities like Kathmandu. Speculation makes industrial land incredibly expensive. There have been historical limits on land ownership for businesses, though that's changing. Zoning, converting agricultural land, it's all complex. And fragmented farms make large-scale agro-processing harder.
And back to that raw material dependence.
It's like a core weakness. Relying on imports for over half your manufacturing inputs makes you vulnerable and keeps value addition low. Even where Nepal exports like edible oils, the sources say they're often importing the crude oil first.
And technology. Keeping up.
Well, consumer tech is booming. Everyone's got smartphones, using mobile payments, QR codes. But industrial technology adoption, much slower. It's costly. You need skilled people. Funding is tight. So digital connectivity is there, but maybe not translating fully to the factory floor yet. And if we connect this all together, you see the vicious circle, right?
Yeah.
Poor infrastructure makes tech expensive, limits skills. Lack of skills hinders tech use. High costs and financing issues block investment in both. And all that makes it tough to compete with imports, which reinforces the import dependence.
It feels quite challenging.
It is. And maybe there's a deeper cultural thing, too, a risk aversion that comes from operating in such an uncertain environment for so long. Harder to take those bold bets.
Okay, that's a sobering list of roadblocks. But you said there were glimmers of hope, real opportunities. Where should Nepal and people watching Nepal be looking?
Definitely. It's not all doom and gloom. There are significant assets and trends they can leverage if they play their cards right.
Let's go back to that hydropower.
It's the potential game changer. That 43 gigawatts. Imagine dedicated industrial zones with access to abundant, cheap, reliable electricity. That tackles a massive cost disadvantage head-on. Plus, they're already exporting power, earning revenue that could, theoretically, be plowed back into making the domestic grid even better for industry.
And agriculture, turning those losses around.
Huge potential there. Processing more rice, maize, tea, coffee, fruits, vegetables locally, that adds value, creates rural jobs, cuts down on that terrible waste. It needs investment in the whole chain, from farm inputs to processing plants, but the raw materials exist.
Tapping into niche strengths, too.
Absolutely. Things like traditional handicrafts, yes, but also leveraging Nepal's biodiversity for natural or Ayurvedic products, and tapping into the global demand for organic, sustainable goods. Play to existing strengths and market trends.
And you mentioned the digital side booming earlier. How does that help manufacturing?
It offers ways to potentially bypass some physical limitations. E-commerce is exploding nearly $900 million revenue projected this year. Platforms like Daraz give even small producers direct market access. Digital payments are everywhere. Mobile banking, wallets, QR codes processing billions.
So easier to sell and get paid.
Exactly. And cross-border QR with India is already happening, simplifying small-scale trade. Plus, think about marketing. High social media use means businesses can build brands and reach customers directly, often very cheaply. Social commerce is a real thing there.
What about the finance side of digital, fintech?
It's evolving fast. Payment providers are active, the central bank is supportive, looking into digital currency, regulatory sandboxes. This could open doors for digital lending, maybe using alternative data for credit scoring for those SMEs who struggle with traditional banks. Open banking could help too.
You know, it strikes me that mix high digital use, government support for startups, a young population that seems like really fertile ground for innovative, maybe digitally native brands that can sidestep some of the old infrastructure problems.
It's a very powerful combination, potentially. And don't forget the existing support systems.
Government programs.
Yeah, the Made in Nepal push, the startup policy, youth startup program, business simplification efforts. They provide a framework, even if they need scaling.
Yeah.
And industry groups like FNCCI are advocating for business.
And you mentioned non-resident Nepalese before, NRNs.
Right. The law allows them to invest directly in businesses, even buy land for commercial purposes, and take profits out. That's a potential pool of capital, but maybe just as importantly, expertise and global connections coming back into the country.
And finally, just the home market itself.
It's growing. Urbanization, population growth, more consumers, especially in cities. Remittances, despite the downside we discussed, do mean more spending power and demand for different kinds of goods. If local producers can offer quality and value, there's a growing domestic customer base to sell to, especially if Made in Nepal campaigns resonate.
Okay, so definitely not a hopeless situation. Real assets, positive trends alongside the challenges. How do they actually do it? What are the strategies to pave this way forward?
Well, the consensus from the sources is it needs a really holistic, coordinated push. Government, producers, consumers, everyone needs to be pulling in roughly the same direction.
What's the government's to-do list?
Top priority. Infrastructure. Seriously accelerate hydropower for cheap industrial power. Upgrade roads, logistics, warehousing, tackle those high costs and delays. Second, simplify rules, improve governance. Less red tape, predictable policies, fight corruption, sort out land use for industry. Third, boost SME support. Better access to affordable finance, more technical help, help them find markets. Fourth, human capital. Align education with industry needs, boost vocational training, maybe find ways to lure back some diaspora talent. And finally, actively promote domestic raw material production where possible, reduce that import reliance at the source.
That's a hefty agenda for policymakers. What about the businesses themselves?
They've got homework too. Focus on innovation. What do local customers need? What niche products can compete? Quality is non-negotiable. Invest in branding. Use those digital tools for marketing. Adopt technology for efficiency, even if it's incremental. And collaborate. Build stronger ties with local suppliers, distributors, maybe even other producers. And invest in training their own workforce.
And us, the
Yeah.
consumers.
Yeah.
What's our role?
It comes down to choice, really. Actively looking for and choosing Made in Nepal when the quality and price make sense. Giving feedback so producers can improve. It's about creating that demand pull, showing there's a market for local goods. But this raises that crucial question again. How do you actually coordinate all this? Because isolated efforts won't cut it, right? Better roads don't help if businesses can't get loans to expand or if consumers still prefer imports. It all has to link up.
An ecosystem approach.
Exactly. And one really key connector that the sources mention, finding smart ways to channel some of those remittances. Move them away from just being spent on consumption or buying land and into productive investments. into manufacturing businesses, into SMEs.
How do you do that?
You need attractive, safe investment options specifically designed for that purpose, maybe social bonds, maybe investment funds, and financial literacy so people understand the options and feel confident investing back into the productive economy.
Wow. So taking the very thing that fuels the current import dependency.
And turning it into the fuel for building domestic capacity instead. It's a powerful idea, linking the present reality directly to the future goal.
Okay. So we've journeyed through Nepal's economic landscape today, focusing on this push for stronger domestic supply chains. We've seen the scale of the challenge, the deep reliance on remittances and imports, tangled up with roadblocks in infrastructure, skills, finance, policy.
A complex picture for sure.
But we've also seen real opportunities. Leveraging that incredible hydropower potential, the agricultural base, the explosion in digital connectivity, a growing market, diaspora links.
It underlines that this is a long game. It's about transformation, not just tinkering. It needs that sustained, coordinated effort. You mentioned government, business, and people.
Government creating the right conditions, producers stepping up with innovation and quality, and consumers making those supportive choices.
And maybe, underlying it all, a shift in mindset. Moving away from just being a consumption-driven economy fueled from outside towards becoming a production-driven one, building real national pride in things genuinely made in Nepal.
Which kind of leaves us with a final thought for you, our listeners, to chew on. Nepal has these unique assets, massive hydro potential, a young, digitally connected population. How can it truly leverage those specific strengths to break the cycle of dependency and make Made in Nepal a mark of real quality and competitiveness, maybe even globally? And what role could any of us play, even just by understanding, in supporting that kind of fundamental shift?
Definitely something worth thinking about.
Indeed. Until next time on The Deep Dive, keep digging deep.